So we have Matthew Jacob. He's the Senior Enterprise Applications Administrator in the Department of Innovation and Performance at the City of Pittsburgh. He's responsible for the management of a variety of different software applications. He has worked with the City of Pittsburgh since 2014 and holds a master's in public management from the Heinz College of Carnegie Mellon University. He also tells me that he likes to hike with his dog, and during COVID, he mapped all of the city's trails using a Trimble receiver. We have Quint Pertzsch, he is the Director of Sales Engineering at Cartograph, where he has served in that capacity for the last 9 years. Prior to joining Cartograph, Quint worked at the county and the municipal government level for 16 years, with a majority of that time spent with asset and work management, GIS integration, and mobile technology. He resides in Denver, and in addition to taking advantage of the great outdoors of Colorado, he volunteers at various beer festivals throughout the country. Quint and Matthew, it's your show.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. While I get set up here, I just want to say that all these presentations so far have been fantastic. I've definitely found everything so far very interesting from a vendor perspective. And so on this presentation, we're going to kind of talk about where our needs came from as a city, and how it kind of overlaps with both some vendors we've worked with, including Cartograph. So what we're going to talk about today is the City of Pittsburgh's streetlight inventory transition to LED lighting. Basically, this project was undertaken a couple of years ago, and I'm just going to give a summary of that project and where we're going with it. So an overview of the presentation, first we'll talk about the challenge that we faced. Then we'll go into our project with Cyclomedia, who we contracted with for the inventory of the streetlights and utility poles in our right-of-way. After that, I'm going to talk about how we are going to use that information for the LED conversion project in a variety of different ways. In addition to that, kind of future goals, I want to talk about integrating that data with our daily workflow processes. And finally, I'm going to then turn it over of how you can apply that data collected using Cartograph. So I'm going to throw that over to Quint for that section of the presentation. So I think it would help just to give a general idea of the City of Pittsburgh for any of those not familiar. We are located in Northeast Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on the western side of the state. Our population is about 300,000 within the city limits. The metro area is about 2.5 million people. The area of the city is 55 square miles. And within the city, we have about 1,200 linear miles of road. And the reason I mentioned that is because obviously right-of-ways and street lighting, there's a relationship between that and the amount of road you have. So that kind of gives a sense of what our network, the size of our network. Like many Northeast cities, we are an older city with a lot of legacy infrastructure to maintain. And in addition to that, as you can see from the picture, we have our three rivers that meet at the confluence. There is a lot of topographical features to Pittsburgh that can make certain things challenging, so very hilly region. But it is also part of our charm, I suppose. So some of the challenges we faced, generally speaking for Pittsburgh, one of the main challenges we face outside of many things, like outside of just this project, is that our city was heavily reliant on steel production, as many people may be aware. And with the steel industry leaving, there was quite a significant population decline over the past 50 years. So we used to have a population in the city of almost 700,000, and since the 70s, and now we're at a population of about 300,000. Has started to kind of level out for the first time in a long time, rather than just kind of perpetually declining. However, that means that we still have about the same. We have a half the tax base, but we still have virtually the same amount of infrastructure left to maintain from what was there before. I just always give the example, just because half of the houses on a street moved out doesn't mean that we can stop paving that street or that we can stop providing services to half the streetlights on the street. It's still a whole street, and we still have to maintain the whole thing, even if there's not residents in all those houses. In addition to that, most of our existing streetlights are aging high-pressure sodium fixtures, so they are quite old and getting dated, and they use more energy than, of course, LEDs. So of our current streetlight network, it's pretty much responsible for half of the electricity that the city uses in our day-to-day operations. So we are responsible for the energy bill for those streetlights. And so it takes up a significant amount of our expenditures in that regard. But in addition to that, it's one of our biggest contributors to our carbon footprint, right? So if it's consuming the most energy, it's also one of those biggest contributors. And it's a very important goal of our administration and our city as a whole to address our carbon footprint as best as we can within the power we have as a city. Finally, we didn't have any detailed inventory of the streetlights before we got started on this project. Without that detailed inventory, getting into this project, budgeting for the project, just planning all those very important details was, I don't want to say impossible, but it would just be best guesses, right? We wanted to be able to make informed decisions about this project so that we could plan accordingly and really hit the ground running once we select a vendor for it. And so when I speak of our old inventory, I think a lot of people are probably familiar with this. You get in there and you peel back the curtain, you're told there's a database that exists, and it's an Excel sheet. So that was the database that, we inherited when we got into this project. And at the time, this might have been the best that could have been done with the technology at the time, or just, practically at the time. So this is a pretty old database. It was inventoried quite some time ago. But as you can see here in the location section of this sheet, we have, for instance, Forbes Avenue. That's all it says. Forbes Avenue is miles long in our city. So if our sheet and it lists out the location just says Forbes Avenue, that could really be anywhere in the city. So we knew that this wasn't enough. We needed a very accurate and detailed inventory of all our streetlights that we could then make an informed decision about all the other details that would go into this project. These are the benefits we were just seeking for the conversion to LED streetlights. This might not, come as a surprise to a lot of people, but we are, looking for less energy consumed, a lot of savings in utilities. We definitely want to look at dark sky standards, so make sure that we reduce light pollution, better visibility, so public safety benefits, both in terms of, better visibility for driving, but also other, lighting and things like that to make sure areas are well lit and safe, and then a longer lifespan on the light fixtures themselves. So when we got into this project, we knew that Cyclomedia was a partner with Cartograph. We've been working with Cartograph for quite some time. So, we wanted to work with Cyclomedia as well, since there was just kind of that benefit there. And when we got involved with them, basically we contracted them to drive the entire city and inventory all of our streetlights and utility poles, as well as details about those assets. So, of course, things like height, material, type of fixture, wattage, and stuff like that. So this is just a side-by-side view here really quick of the same area in the city. So on the left-hand side, you see what we have in Cartograph, and all the orange dots kind of represent either a street light or a utility pole. And then on the right-hand side, that is the Cyclomedia layer. And each green dot represents an area of the city where they drove and where we can access imagery from that. We also benefit, of course, from having that imagery, so we can apply that imagery to other things. So like while we relied on cyclomedia for the extraction of the streetlight information, we can use this on like a spot basis if we want to do inventory on other things. So we use the up-to-date street level imagery to complete our inventory of our ADA ramps. But we can also use it for things like signage and stuff like that if we want to just inventory ourselves using up-to-date imagery, since while we do have street view imagery for a lot of the city, there are many areas where that imagery can be, the last time it was recorded was 2016 or something like that. So just a breakdown of essentially what was collected as a result of this project. We identified 35,000 high pressure sodium lights that would be replaced. So we were focusing on a certain type of fixture. We do have decorative and pedestrian scale lighting that we will not be addressing with this project, but we identified 35,000 of the type of fixture that we want to replace with LED fixtures. In addition to that, we identified 67,000 poles in total. Some have streetlights attached, some don't. And this is all within our right of way. And further, we identified 3,000 locations where we could potentially expand lighting. And I will touch on that in a moment. But these numbers are also subject to change. The scope of the project has a potential to expand, especially with the American Rescue Plan Act funding coming through. So there is, we're not quite clear on how that will be allocated necessarily, but these numbers certainly have the potential to get bigger if we want to take on bigger parts or more scope for this project. So with this information in hand, we were able to then, put out an informed request for proposals. So we issued a request for proposals to replace all of our city's high pressure sodium fixtures over a 3-year period. The data from our collection has been provided to vendors so that they can use it to form their proposals, right? It's kind of hard to make an informed proposal if we can't even tell you where we have lights or what types of lights we have, if that would just be a factor of them having to figure it out on their own. In addition, we want to work with the vendor to update the information in Cartograph as changes are made and track maintenance against our streetlights in our work order management system. Further with this data, we were able to perform light equity analysis. So the picture on the side here is a shot of Pittsburgh at nighttime from about 40,000 feet. And so you can kind of get a sense of lighting distribution. We had analysis performed by our GIS team to identify how many new lights would be needed to light every street, an average of 1 street light per about 150 feet to have that distribution across the city. So with that, that's where that 3,000 new fixtures number came from, that if we wanted to have, completely well-distributed light equity across the city, that we would have to have that many new installations. Like many other cities, we have different neighborhoods that have been disinvested for a variety of reasons. And so we're trying to take advantage of this project to address that and rectify some of those kind of historical disinvestments in some communities. And this is a perfect time to do that with this project. Further with the data, we're able to do public engagement. So these screenshots are from a public engagement site that is specific to the streetlight conversion project. So residents can go to this site, they can get a ton of information about street lighting. They can see our current streetlight inventory now. So we've made that public. But in addition to that, we're seeking feedback from them. What matters to them about street lighting? What's their perception of street lighting? What would they like to see included in this project that maybe we haven't thought about? So there is a survey on the site as well. So with this, we're able to make a really, not to just keep using the word, but it is a very engaging site that we can point residents to show everything that we can provide about street lighting, but to also seek feedback from them about street lighting. Because this is, this is a ubiquitous piece of infrastructure, and it does matter a lot to people. Especially, it could matter for aesthetic purposes outside their house, for safety purposes. It could matter for their commute where there's issues with lighting. So we want to hear that feedback and make sure we're taking everything into consideration. Further, as some other presenters have noted, there is 5G expansion in Pittsburgh as well. We have hundreds of small cell sites around the city. But from our perspective as a city that manages the right of way, we need to make sure these sites are permitted. As some other presenters have noted, there is 5G expansion. Sorry, there is some feedback there. But so yeah, we have hundreds of these sites, but since we're the ones managing the right of way, we need to make sure that they're being permitted and that they are allowed to be there. So identifying those sites is very valuable to us. In addition, we can make sure that we match up, permits with the locations that we've identified and have that all in one place so we can attach those files to the records in Cartograph. Further, we want to be able to use the inventory data to identify suitable sites for 5G antenna. So basically, we can provide attribute information about the pole location so that a person can say, yeah, that is a suitable pole for me to attach an antenna to, or I need to put a new pole there, or in the future, there's a possibility, of course, people might just put a whole new installation where no pole exists currently. And so the inventory data we intend to have synced up with our permitting system so that people who want to apply for a permit to attach something to a pole can see all the sites and we're all on the same page, that we're all talking about the same location. Finally, we also took this opportunity with this project to remove some of our legacy infrastructure. So on the left-hand side, that is a picture of Pittsburgh over 100 years ago, and that is a trolley pole. So our right-of-way looked quite different. We do not have the same trolleys anymore. We mostly have buses. And on the right-hand side, you can see this is not the exact same location. I couldn't do enough sleuthing to find, to match up an old picture with an exact current location, but you can see the exact same type of trolley pole still exists, but with a lot more stuff attached to it to kind of be suitable to a modern day right-of-way. These trolley poles, we have a few thousand of them still around the city. They're quite old. They kind of stick out like a sore thumb, and we want to just remove them or replace them entirely and make everything look a little bit aesthetically nicer. And a lot of them are also just standalone poles at this point. There's nothing even attached to them. They're just kind of sitting there. So we've taken this opportunity to try to find those around the city and get them removed or replaced. So future objectives for us, the future objectives will be integrating this data into our workflow and day-to-day processes. Doing an inventory for all of our assets on a citywide basis and a frequent routine it can either be at times cost prohibitive or resource prohibitive. So some of those options out there, we might need to send out a ton of interns or something, or has been the idea to go collect information, but that's still hard to do on a citywide basis, which was of course the appeal with something like Cycle Media, where they could drive the whole city and take care of that kind of extraction and all the attribution of the assets that were being extracted. So in this instance, we had to prioritize because this was a very important project for us. But with the rest of our assets, if we can't just constantly go inventory them, how do we make sure that we kind of have a living, breathing database rather than just having to kind of start from scratch every single time we want to go back and know what we have in our right of way? And so that's where Cartograph comes into play. So of course, the first step is inventorying the assets. And for some things that could just be an ongoing project. We've inventoried about 70,000 street signs, but we're adding more and more every single day. And we rely on our field crews to let us know when they install a new sign that a sign exists there now. And so that we constantly have information on our inventory. The next step would be to define a process. So it depends on what we're trying to track or what the nature of the asset is. But like, for instance, in the case of our street lighting, we would probably want to define a process where when a light gets replaced, we update our records for that specific record in our system to know that that light has been replaced. Finally, in addition to that would be automating the process. So making it as easy as possible for our field workers or vendors or whoever else we have to work with. So, for instance, something I could foresee happening is that if we get an indication, a system that a light has been upgraded, it could schedule a follow-up inspection for one of our right-of-way inspectors to validate that, yes, indeed, it was inspected and that it was done properly. In addition, we're always iterating. So iterating can be, we get feedback from our field workers as to how the process could be improved or made easier or be more valuable to us. Or there could be enhancements to technology, either in the sense of, Cartograph, which we rely heavily on, might release enhancements to their software. Or there might just be other things that come out, like other softwares or hardwares that come out that could make this work easier. So we're always looking for ways to just keep, to keep improving that process. And finally, applying the data. So, we have all this data. It's very detailed and it's, it's comprehensive for the entire city. So how can we take that information and apply it in a way that is useful to us? And that's where, and on the side here, I have a shot of a scenario builder from Cartograph. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to Quint.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So thank you for that, Matt. And that's a great presentation in terms of, what are the first steps that we need to go, collect the information, inspect the information, but then what do we end up doing with this information once we have it and we want to start making some long-term data-driven decisions. So I've logged into my Cartograph system and I can set up some different dashboard gadgets so I can see how many LED lights we have currently. If I want to open up one of these dashboard gadgets, I can get some basic information about this, export this information out. I can even scroll over to my asset page and see all of the lights in my city or just the location of where the LED lights are in the city to get a sense on how much work we have to do or where do we have to do this work. But to take this a step further, Matt showed a screen cap of this, we can go into Cartograph's Scenario Builder. And Scenario Builder is a tool that allows organizations to create what-if scenarios. We have this much money, where should we be spending this money on what specific assets and what activities should we be doing? So I'm going to take a look at one. This is a replication from what Matt showed in his PowerPoint, but I happen to have a 10-year budget limitation. I've got $3 million. Where should I spend this $3 million? After my 10 years, I'm going to spend all but $48,000 of this. I'm going to spend 2.9 of that $3 million. And it's going to generate or recommend 645 unique activities just for streetlights. And whatever those activities are that we are talking about, whether those are relamping, replacing the lights, doing an LED upgrade to those lights. I can see from year to year. In year one, I'm budgeting $502,000. In year two, $104,000. Year three, $258,000. In year 10, almost $1 million. All of these things that we're looking at are completely configurable. And then these numbers at the end of this ribbon are showing me what my beginning overall condition index was for my network, all of the lights that we had. And by following these recommendations, what is our network growth? We had a 28-point growth in our network simply by doing some of the same activities that Matt was mentioning earlier. As I scroll down, I can take a look at what my activity costs per plan year are broken down. So out of my first year, $502,000, nearly all of that is spent on replacement activities. Makes sense. Replacement activities are the most expensive activities that we have. But in year two, I'm spending about 10 grand on bulb replacement. And all of these different activities are completely configurable by an organization. As I continue to scroll down, I can see what my year-to-year budget is and what my budget surplus is at the end of each year. And then I have this great tabular view of all of the different activities that the system is recommending that we do. For light 223, we are going to do a replacement. It's going to cost $5,100. And all of those costs can be built into the system so we can actually see what's going on and where we should be spending these dollars. If I want to, I can get some more details about this particular scenario, including what's my activity sequence. The activity sequence would be what things do you want to do first? In this particular case, I have asset criticality. So what are our most critical light fixtures or lights in the city, and the lowest estimated OCI. In other words, let's put our money towards the worst first assets. We could shift this and do that to our highest performing assets. But all of this information is great, but we have an added bonus that we can see on a map where all of these different activities are to be taking place. So if I zoom in on my map, I can see in year one, here are the different lights that we'll be doing a replacement activity one, where the beginning overall condition index, the condition of this was not very good, was an 18. The ending overall condition index is a 90. Or for this bulb replacement, how much is this going to cost and how does that affect the overall condition of that particular asset? If we needed to, we can gamify the application and we can shift from year to year to year. My map will update dynamically to see exactly where work should be performed throughout the city. And this can be applicable to any asset that you may be tracking, including these lights that we're looking at. An end user also has the ability to lock in these activities. So if we're going to be sending out contractors and the mobilization costs are always the highest for going across the city, maybe we want to do this particular subdivision first before we do another subdivision and push that out to another year. So lots of great ways that we can leverage that data that's been collected by another vendor, utilized by the organization, and now using that same information and all the work history that Matt's group has collected to now make some long-term budgetary analysis decisions. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Matt.
Thank you, Quint. So I'm just going to put up, to wait till you're done sharing so I can put up our last slide here.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
All right, can you do that now?
No, still not yet. Oh, wait, we're good. So that kind of concludes our presentation. Now we'll go into the questions and answers section. Thanks for having us both. I hope everyone found that interesting to see things from the perspective of a middle-sized city client. So the challenges we face and how we kind of seek help to address those challenges.
Well, thank you both for your presentation. And let me start with some questions from the participants. On your scenario builder tool, can you run plans for any assets or just streetlights?
Any asset is applicable for that. Any asset that the organization is tracking, any of those right-of-way assets that Matt was talking about or that Brian was sharing earlier can be utilized in that scenario builder tool.
I see. And how do organizations determine the costs that are plugged into the scenario builder?
Great question. I'll let Matt answer this. I'll take a first stab at it, but we can certainly import historic costs, or a lot of organizations tend to use bid information like Matt was referring to earlier about what the cost is going to be for doing this particular activity against these specific assets.
Yeah, and from our organization's perspective, we've used Scenario Builder to generate scenarios for our paving projects, and basically we've used historical costs. So we might know it costs this much to pave this many square yards of pavement, and we have that kind of information in our network. How much the area of our pavement. So we can make those calculations and those estimations.
I see. And can you create work plans from the scenarios once you're happy with the results?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Let's see. what do you use to plan the best route to drive the data?
So that would be a question we'd have to turn back over to Cyclomedia. We did not determine the routes they would take. We basically worked with them. It was just a whole city, so we worked with them and kind of identified different areas that they could focus on and deliver us the information in batches so that we could QA QC that as it came in, basically. But we did not prioritize the routes or decide how they would drive it, just as long as they got the entire city done, basically.
I see. So overall, what was your biggest challenge for this project?
I think the biggest challenge was definitely getting, before we could even get started, it was absolutely just, we know that we have so many streetlights out there, but we really had no handle on how many were out there, what types of lights were out there, where they were, what condition they were in, things like that. So getting a handle on that was absolutely necessary before we could, before we could have any other sort of undertaking to replace them all and upgrade them.
So I assume that the system you set up now is ongoing, but if you compare what you found when you started this with what somebody might find 5 years from now, maybe the answer is obvious, but I mean, what will they have as far as the data and the tools that you didn't have when you started?
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be so much more detailed, and it's going to be so much easier to analyze at a high level. They'll be able to see every light in the city, what type of pole it's on, what type of light it is, fixture, wattage information, and be able to see, when was that replaced. As we would be able to then, if we have all this information in the future, be able to better estimate, when are we going to need to replace it next and track work against those things. So we can also, hopefully we'd be able to in the future flag lights that have routine problems. Why are we constantly out there fixing this light? Things like that. It's just going to be such night and day difference from where we started, for sure.
Right. Have you had queries and interest from other cities and conversations about that?
We haven't yet. I mean, this is a really new project. You kind of, found us right when we're in the midst of it. We just issued the RFP probably a couple of weeks ago. So, there's kind of two separate stages, right? The inventory was its own thing that we needed to have on our own end internally so that we could make informed decisions about how to proceed. And then there was a lot of work to get to the point to issuing an RFP, which is still currently open for applications. And then once that all happens, of course, a vendor would be selected, and then we would get started on the process of actually replacing all these lights.
And comparing Pittsburgh with other cities, what is unique about Pittsburgh in terms of this project? I guess one variable is just the age of the infrastructure and the number of legacy features you have.
Yeah, that's definitely one kind of unique aspect to Pittsburgh. We are certainly very interested in trying to make the best informed decisions we can. As I mentioned, we kind of have a system of infrastructure that's built for more than it was in our tax base now is smaller. So we have more infrastructure than maybe we should have for the amount of people we have. So we need to make the best decisions we can to manage our infrastructure and our money accordingly. So having that data is super important to us.
And if you were to talk to some of your colleagues in other cities in terms of lessons learned or top 3 things to do to make this kind of project easier?
That's a good question. Some of our lessons learned, I think we probably, we came across a lot more types of lights than we probably thought we would have. So, you think you have a good accounting for everything that could be out there, but you're always going to come across other stuff. But it's definitely very important to try to organize that information as best as you can from the start, so that we're all on the same page when we're kind of categorizing and inventorying these things and giving, defining the attributes of those assets. Other than that, I think honestly that the collection went really well. We didn't run into a lot of situations where we were really surprised or, thrown through a loop by something that came up. It went really smoothly, and the data we got we're really happy with. So I think we definitely benefit from being very organized in the beginning and making sure that us and the vendor and everyone else were on the same page about what we were collecting, what we were defining, but we didn't run into a lot of surprises.
And so what might be the next set of assets that you might inventory along these lines?
So yeah, so we are certainly interested in doing this for other assets. In terms of the right of way, we actually did use the imagery to complete our ADA ramp inventory, but it's a kind of higher. It's mostly just tracking where we have them and what kind of standard those ramps are, but we might want to track more detailed information about those ramps. Condition of pavement is something we've done in the past. I can definitely see a benefit to that, to kind of redoing that assessment, since it's been a little bit since we have done a full-blown pavement condition assessment. And I think as you mentioned, it's not right of way, but I'm very excited about us getting our trail information out there in a public format. It's something we haven't had, and so we're pretty close to having something like that and expanding on that as a public resource for people to visit our parks.
Mm-hmm. And with this light inventory, I know it's still early, but I'm wondering how much visibility, no pun intended, might have gotten from, on the one hand, the public, and the other hand, city council. Yeah.
So it's been mentioned, definitely in our council. We actually are currently having public hearings about the American Rescue Plan funding and how that should be allocated. So this is one of kind of the line items in the proposal for where to invest some of that money. So it is a topic amongst council members as well as residents. And we, a big part of that topic is the light equity component, right? How do we rectify disinvestment, historic disinvestment with this project and make sure we're doing that right? So yeah, it certainly has had a visibility, and we definitely hope with that public website that we get a lot more engagement from the public and feedback on what they want to see with this project, since it is it's a project that's going to touch every single street in this city in a 3-year span. So that's a pretty big undertaking, and we definitely want a lot of feedback.
Right. No, I actually not. Go ahead. Oh, I thought I heard maybe it's feedback. So I asked you a moment ago about other assets that you might map, but I was thinking that in terms of sort of a technical point of view, but from an equity point of view, what are some of other features that are of particular concern?
Yeah, in the past, talking about equity and infrastructure and how that applies, a great example is pavement, and equity doesn't mean equal, right? So, and the example I give is that for one, we have 9 council districts, but if we just decided to evenly distribute funding across all 9, that's not necessarily equitable, because certain council districts might have, they might have more, linear miles of road that need to be addressed, and their roads might be in worse condition. So giving both, the same amount of money isn't necessarily equitable. And then with this project, that's the same idea. It's like we didn't look at the city and say every neighborhood should get an equal amount of new lights, because that just wouldn't make sense, right? It's looking at how do we bring up other neighborhoods that are disinvested to be at the same level of other areas of the city in terms of lighting. So pavement is definitely something that, can come up as an equity issue. It is one of the bigger investments that, we make in our infrastructure. So that's an important one. I think similarly, things like pedestrian infrastructure. So
sidewalks, I was thinking.
yeah. So in the city, actually, we are a weird instance where the private property owner is responsible for a sidewalk. So the city is not responsible for the maintenance of sidewalks. That being said, we do need to look at things with regard to pedestrian infrastructure, like the ADA ramps, the condition they're in, whether they're up to standard, pavement markings, crosswalks, and things like that. And also identify where that stuff is missing. So for instance, we should not have places where there is a crosswalk, but there's no ADA ramps. But they likely do exist, and we need to fix that. So finding those types of scenarios and fixing that is, I think, pretty important.
Mm-hmm. We got a couple other questions. How do you get a copy of the RFP?
It is posted on our city's website. It would be the name of the website where we post stuff is called Beacon. So I would just Google Pittsburgh Beacon, and that's where we would post those RFPs.
Thank you. And somebody else asked, do you plan to reuse this data for any other features?
So, the extraction data was specific to, is provided to us, and it was specific to poles and streetlights. We can use the imagery for other features if we wanted to, and we can certainly contract and decide on other features we want to extract in the future. So, or we can use the existing LiDAR and imagery data. If we decided next year that we want to use the last year's data, but extract something else from that, we could do that. So I'm not aware of any specific plans right at this moment, but we certainly have that option if we wanted to pursue it for other features.
Thank you, Matthew. Quint, any final comments about maybe Cartograph's experience working with the city and other similar projects you might undertake?
Yeah, just partnering with the city of Pittsburgh and people like Matt, who do a great job of leveraging the technology that we provide with the data that they're collecting has been tremendous. The value of a software like Cartograph is that it can be used across multiple domains, different departments, different divisions, and we're still basically tracking all of the conditional information and historic information so you can have instant information at your fingertips.
Wonderful. Okay, well, then this concludes this presentation.